All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive.
Definitely always up for a good deep dive.
Today, we're looking at something super relevant, I think, for anyone who's interested in, how things actually work in India when it comes to, well, protecting our rights.
Okay, yeah.
State human rights commissions.
Ah, interesting.
You've probably heard about the National Human Rights Commission,
Of
right?
course, that's the big one.
But a lot of people don't realize there's this whole other layer of these commissions working at the state level.
Makes sense. Yeah.
It's kind of like this hidden network almost.
Right.
So we're going to unpack all of that today.
Looking forward to it.
But first, I think just to make sure we're all on the same page, what are we talking about when we say human rights? Like, what does that even mean in everyday life?
Yeah, good point. It's one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot,
Yeah,
but it's worth really defining.
totally.
So, at its core, it's about those fundamental rights and freedoms that every single person is entitled to,
Mhm.
simply by virtue of being human. Exactly right.
Doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what you believe, any of that.
Right.
These are things like the right to live with dignity,
Mm-hmm.
to be free from discrimination,
Right.
access to education, healthcare, all those things that impact, our lives on a daily basis.
Totally. It's about the stuff that, actually matters for living a good life. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And India has obviously signed on to a bunch of international agreements. Plus, it's right there in our Constitution, the commitment to protecting these rights.
Right.
And this is where the Human Rights Commissions come in, both at the national and the state levels.
They're a key part of how that protection is actually put into practice.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty now.
Right.
We've got this Protection of Human Rights Act of 1993.
Yeah.
That's our starting point.
The foundation.
The foundation, yeah.
Yeah.
And it mandates, it lays out, how both the national and the state level commissions are supposed to be set up.
And I was actually surprised to learn this. 25 states have already set up their own commissions.
Wow, that many.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
So this isn't like just some idea on paper.
Right.
It's an active system.
It's in action.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Now, here's where I think it gets really interesting, though, in terms of how it all fits together.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
The state commissions, they specifically deal with violations related to subjects that fall into the state and concurrent lists of the Constitution.
Ah, yes, the division of powers
Exactly.
between the central and state governments.
So we're talking things like law and order, health,
Yes.
education,
Education, right.
all those areas where the state government has, the primary responsibility.
So what you're saying is it's like a jurisdictional thing.
Yeah. So let's say there's a case of, I don't know, police brutality, right?
Okay.
Law and order, that's a state subject.
Mm-hmm.
So that would probably go to the State Human Rights Commission, not the national one.
That makes sense. It keeps things more localized.
It's about addressing the issue at the most appropriate level.
Right. Closer to where it actually happened.
Now, another thing that's important to understand is these commissions, they're not just like a one-person show, right?
No, definitely not.
They're designed to be these multi-member bodies.
Multi-member, why is that?
And there's a good reason for that.
Okay. Yeah.
Each one is headed by a chairperson.
Mm-hmm.
And the chairperson, get this, is a retired Chief Justice of a high court.
So someone with serious legal experience,
Oh, yeah.
a deep understanding of, how the law works.
They've seen it all.
They've been there, done that.
Makes sense to have that kind of expertise at the top, right?
Absolutely.
But they're not alone in this.
Right.
They have two other members working with them.
Two other members, okay.
And one of those members is either a serving or retired judge from a high court
Mm-hmm.
or a district judge with at least 7 years of experience.
Got it.
So again, that legal background is really important.
Yeah.
But then the second member, this is where it gets interesting.
Oh, okay.
They're chosen specifically for their knowledge and experience in the field of human rights.
So it's a blend then.
Yeah. You've got that judicial expertise
Mm-hmm.
and that human rights expertise.
Really bringing different perspectives to the table.
Totally.
A good mix.
Now, how do these people actually get appointed?
Yeah, how does that work?
There's a whole committee involved,
The committee, right.
headed by the chief minister,
Okay.
and it includes, key figures like the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly,
Mm-hmm.
the Home Minister, leader of the opposition.
Right.
And if the state has a legislative council, then the chairperson and leader of the opposition from that body are on the committee too.
Wow, so it's quite a diverse group.
Yeah, representing different different viewpoints, different parts of the state government.
Makes sense, yeah.
And here's another layer that I think is really important.
Oh.
If they're considering a sitting judge for a position on the commission,
Right.
they have to consult with the Chief Justice of the High Court of that state
So there's that check and balance.
to make sure it's not, totally swayed one way or another.
It's an attempt to ensure impartiality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you've got this multi-member body. You've got this pretty rigorous appointment process,
Right.
all designed to, make sure this commission is independent.
Can actually function effectively.
Right.
But I'm curious, does it actually work that way in reality?
I mean, are there cases where, despite all these safeguards, the commission's independence has been, questioned?
Oh, absolutely. That's a question that comes up all the time, especially, for UPSC aspirants who are really trying to understand the nuances of how these systems work.
Right, right.
On paper, it all looks good, but the reality can be a bit messier. There have definitely been instances where, people have raised concerns about, like, political influence,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to, like, who gets appointed to the commission
Right.
or how they handle, certain cases, especially if those cases are, like, politically sensitive.
Like, how do you actually protect against that kind of pressure when you're operating within, a political system?
Yeah, it's a tough one for sure.
That balance.
It's a constant balancing act.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the appointment process either. The way the chairperson and members are, how long they serve, how they can be removed, all of that plays a role.
Okay.
So they have a fixed term, 5 years,
Okay.
or until they reach 70 years old, whichever comes first.
So it's kind of like a built-in term limit.
Exactly. It prevents anyone from, holding that position for too long.
Right, getting too
And
complicated.
it ensures, regular turnover, fresh perspectives coming in.
I like.
Now, the removal process, that's also pretty strict.
All right.
Only the president of India
The president, wow.
can remove a chairperson or a member.
Okay.
And it's not just like they can do it on a whim. There are very specific grounds,
Oh, okay.
like proven misconduct, incapacity to perform their duties, or if they've been convicted of a crime that involves imprisonment.
Serious stuff.
Yeah, it's not taken lightly.
And isn't there also, like, the Supreme Court gets involved, too?
You're right. The Supreme Court actually has a role to play as well.
Okay, so they can actually investigate, like, cases of proved misbehavior or incapacity.
Exactly, before the president can even take action.
Wow, they really thought this through.
Multiple layers of safeguards there.
To make sure, again, it's not being used, for political reasons or anything like that.
Protecting the integrity of the commission.
Okay, so we've talked about the structure, the appointments, all those checks and balances. But what do these commissions actually do?
Right, let's get into the actual work.
Like, how does this translate into, actually protecting human rights?
Well, one of the most important things they do is they have the power to inquire into any violation of human rights or, negligence in preventing those violations. If a public servant is involved.
Public service. So we're talking like government officials, right?
Exactly. Anyone working for the government.
Okay.
And they can do this in two ways, either suo motu,
Sumo too.
or based on a petition that someone files, or even an order from a court.
Hold on, suo motu. Now we're getting into the legal jargon.
Sorry about that. It basically means they don't have to wait for someone to complain.
Okay.
They can initiate an inquiry on their own
Oh, interesting.
if they believe there's a possible human rights violation happening.
So they can be proactive.
Exactly.
So, like, if there's a case of, I don't know, custodial death or something like that.
Exactly. They can launch an investigation without anyone having to file a formal complaint.
That's a pretty big power.
It is. It gives them the ability to really, dig into these situations.
Okay, so what else? What else can they do?
Well, once they've started an inquiry, they can summon witnesses, they can gather evidence, do a thorough investigation.
A real detective work.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay, so it's not just about reacting to individual complaints. It's also about, like, looking for those bigger issues.
Absolutely. They can also intervene
Okay.
in cases of discrimination, especially against minority groups.
Right. So looking at systemic issues, too.
Exactly. They can visit places like jails and detention centers
Oh, okay.
to check on the living conditions there.
To make sure things are up to standard.
Yeah. And then recommend measures for improvement.
So they have a pretty broad mandate.
They do. It's about taking a holistic approach to protecting human rights.
Yeah, not just focusing on, like, one case at a time.
It's about the bigger picture.
Okay, so we've got this picture of a body that investigates, recommends, educates, collaborates. But let's get into the specifics of, like, the nuts and bolts. How do they actually operate?
Right.
What are their powers?
Okay.
And just as importantly, what are their limitations?
Well, to start, they can actually set their own procedures, like how they're going to function,
Okay.
much like a civil court.
Oh, interesting.
And their proceedings, they have this judicial character,
Right.
which means they follow a certain process, rules of evidence,
Mm-hmm.
so that gives their investigations, more weight, more credibility.
It's not just like a informal inquiry or something.
No, it's serious business.
Okay.
They also have the power to summon information, reports,
Okay.
from the state government or any authority that's under the state government's control.
So they can actually get the information they need to do their job properly?
Right? They're not just left in the dark.
Okay, but here's the question I have, and I think this is where it gets a little tricky.
All right.
Enforcement.
Yeah.
Can they actually, punish people who violate human rights?
That's where it gets a little complicated.
Okay.
They have a lot of power to investigate, to bring things to light, expose these violations.
Right.
But their power is mainly recommendatory.
Recommendatory, so they can't, throw someone in jail.
No, they can't directly punish anyone.
So what happens after they do an inquiry then?
Okay, so after an inquiry, they can recommend a whole range of actions to the state government or to whoever, the authority is that's involved.
Okay.
This could include things like, paying compensation to the victim,
Right.
initiating proceedings to actually prosecute a public servant if they're found guilty of violating someone's rights, or providing, immediate relief to the victim.
So if it's an urgent situation.
Exactly. Something needs to be done right away.
Okay.
And if they need to, they can even go to the Supreme Court or the High Court
Wow.
to ask for specific directions.
So they're not powerless?
No, not at all.
But ultimately, it sounds like it comes down to the state government, whether they actually follow those recommendations.
That's the key point, and it's definitely where a lot of people feel the system, could be stronger.
What happens if the state government just ignores them?
Well, they are obligated to tell the commission
Okay.
what actions they've taken based on the recommendations within 1 month.
Okay.
But those recommendations,
Yeah.
they're not legally binding, so they can just say, thanks, but no thanks.
Pretty much.
That seems like a bit of a weak spot.
It is, for sure. It raises questions about, how effective the system really is.
But there's got to be some way to put pressure on them.
Well, there is the fact that the commission's reports, both the annual ones and any special ones, they get submitted to the state government, but then they're also laid before the state legislature.
So it becomes public.
Exactly. So there's that element of transparency.
Okay.
And, public scrutiny. So that can act as a kind of indirect pressure, right?
Exactly. People start asking questions, media gets involved.
Right. It puts the government in the spotlight.
And that can sometimes be enough to get them to, take those recommendations more seriously.
Okay, so it's not just about the legal framework itself.
Right. Public awareness is huge.
People power.
Exactly.
Okay, before we wrap up this deep dive,
Yes.
there's one more thing I wanted to touch on.
Okay.
Human rights courts at the district level.
So these courts, they're specifically there to, speed up trials for human rights violations.
That sounds like a good thing.
Definitely. The idea is to make sure these cases don't get bogged down,
Right. Justice delayed is justice denied.
Exactly.
So how are these courts, set up?
So the state government establishes them,
Okay.
but they need the okay from
Yeah.
the Chief Justice of the High Court.
So again, that check and balance.
Exactly.
Oh.
And they have a dedicated public prosecutor or a specially appointed advocate, someone with a lot of experience.
So they really know what they're doing.
Right. They're not just, thrown into this without the proper background.
Because these cases can be pretty complex, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. They often involve, complicated legal questions and very sensitive issues.
I'm curious, have you come across any real life examples where the commission's intervention actually made a difference in someone's life?
Oh, absolutely. There are a number of cases
Okay.
where they've had a positive impact.
That's good to hear.
One that comes to mind is this young woman
Okay.
who was denied healthcare.
Denied health care. Wow.
Yeah, because of her caste.
Oh, that's awful.
It was a terrible situation, and the State Human Rights Commission actually took sua motu cognizance.
There's that term again.
Yeah, so they took the initiative themselves. They did an inquiry, issued some really strong recommendations to the government. And the government, with all that pressure from the commission and the public scrutiny,
Yeah.
they actually took action.
Wow, that's amazing.
The woman got the treatment she needed.
That's what I wanted to hear.
And they implemented measures to try to prevent that kind of discrimination from happening again.
So it shows they're not just, all talk and no action.
Right, they can actually make things happen.
They can be a voice for people who don't have one.
Exactly. But, and this is important to acknowledge,
Okay.
there have also been times where, their recommendations have been ignored.
Right, it's not a perfect system.
Not at all. And sometimes their investigations don't lead to the outcomes you'd hope for.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it's complex. And a lot depends on things that are, outside their control.
Like what?
Well, the political will of the state government,
All right.
whether other institutions are willing to cooperate, things like that.
So it's not just about, one institution.
It's a collective effort.
It takes a village. Okay, so to wrap all of this up, because I know we've covered a lot of ground today, what are the key takeaways, especially for, those UPSC aspirants out there?
I think the biggest thing is, don't just memorize the law.
Right.
Understand the nuances.
The good, the bad, the ugly.
Exactly. The successes, the failures, the challenges these commissions face.
It's like we've gone beyond just the engine specs. We've actually taken the car for a spin.
Exactly.
All right. Well, as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay, shoot.
We've looked at the structure, the powers, the limitations of these state human rights commissions.
Right.
But the question I keep coming back to is, how can we make them even better?
That's the million-dollar question.
How do we ensure they have, the resources they need, the independence, the power to actually do what they're supposed to do?
That's something for all of us to think about.
Yeah, whether you're, an aspiring civil servant or just an engaged citizen.
At the end of the day, informed citizens, they're the foundation of a strong human rights system.
I like that.
By understanding these mechanisms, by, talking about them, having these conversations, we can work together to make these institutions stronger.
And create a society where everyone's rights are actually respected.
That's the goal.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, huge thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
I hope you learned something new, maybe got you thinking a little differently about this whole issue of human rights in India.
It's a fascinating area.
It is.
That's to explore.
Until next time, keep those questions coming, keep learning, and keep the conversation going.